I'm going to stay kind of in one area because I had hip replacement surgery 6 weeks ago. So I'm on my way to recovery, which is great. So, like they mentioned, I work at an alternative high school, so it's a smaller school. And one of our African American students jumped onto the school intercom one day and just started talking without permission, right? But he got caught quickly because the intercom was right outside the principal's office. And he was immediately reprimanded. And I heard there was some talk that he might be, placed on detention for a bit because of it. And just go, oh, there's one of those deviant or defiant students that gets in there, or they, trying to get negative attention, whatever it is. And, it's not a really interesting story, to tell you the truth, but I want to compare it to another story that's similar, okay? So this is Trayvon, one of my leadership students. Funny guy, really, really liked by other students. He really is a natural leader as well as a leader. He's working at the Boys and Girls Club, and does a lot of stuff for them. So he's highly respected. And his girlfriend at the time was working in the front office. So she has an internship in the front office. So he was walking through there and he was chatting with her. And I'm in my room. And all of a sudden over the intercom, I hear, "Hello, it's me." And I crack up because that's like the line of a Adele song, right? That's the beginning. And I know it's Trey. And I just start cracking up because I think here's my African-American student who's all into hip hop and pop and blue R&B and all that stuff, And here he is knowing an Adele song and says this over the intercom. And I just lose it, right? I think this is like humor at the best. And so when I see him, I told him, I go, that was just hilarious, right? And he smiles. And to me, this kind of tells a story about this guy who's a creative, well-liked. He thought this through. He's trying to entertain his students and stuff. And so I look at these two stories and I say, what's the difference between these two? Absolutely nothing. It's the same person. It's the same situation. The only thing different was the perspective. I know Trey, and the principal doesn't necessarily know Trey. He sees him from a different light, right? So here's this same exact situation, but how did you look at it tells a different story, right? And so I knew that he had gotten in trouble. So when I saw him, I'm like, Trey, I got to tell you, that's hysterical. I mean, I wanted to kind of undo the punishment part because I didn't think he deserved it because of the circumstances. I mean, you can say to him, Trey, that's not cool because that's for emergencies or whatever. You have a little conversation with him, but there's no reason to turn it into some huge thing and turn him into this, kind of like bad person that he definitely is not. So it's one incident, but two different stories, two different perspectives that created two different outcomes. So when I talk about cultivating emotional resilience through storytelling, that was just to kind of open up to realize that how you tell a story can make all the difference in the world. So let's look a little bit though at emotional resilience. Emotional trauma. Now, what's really cool is a lot of the schools now are training teachers in emotional trauma and how to work with students, because like I work in Seattle area, and huge percents of 70% of our students at our school, it's 100%, are on free and reduced lunch. Just that alone is a trauma thing. Not having enough food is one of those indicators of there's trauma when you have to figure out what you're going to eat that day, right? So a lot of these students, they have, and I'm going to say some things, but we can relate to some of these as well. But in terms of, parents are divorced, or for ourselves, if we go through a divorce, right? Chronic or terminal illnesses in the family, death of loved ones. And as we, especially even as we age, more and more of our loved ones pass away, and it's traumatic. It is very, very traumatic for our students. We lose students every year to gunshots, and gun killings, every year. Yeah, and I go back and go, oh, that was a student of mine 5 years ago, and it's not, it's very traumatic. You think that in some ways they kind of like, well, we're used to it, but it's trauma inducing. Lack of housing. I'm going to say some things maybe we've dealt with, like in terms of war, going off to war, having loved ones go off to war, um, surviving war and coming back. I have lupus, and with the arthritis that comes from that, I had knee surgery last year, hip surgery this year. So I have a lot of chronic pain. I totally get that, right? But you realize that how, if you're aware of it, how draining that can be, and how tiring it can get, right? So one of the things about emotional trauma is it impacts our brain, and it limits the ability to take in information. With my students, we realize it limits their ability to even get an education, because when they're on high alert, my mom's high this morning when I left, she yelled at me. I don't know what she's going to be like when I get home. Our kids that are homeless, that are taking a taxi from 35 minutes away just to come to the school so we let them stay at the school so they can have some consistency. So they get there, and if you're like, okay, here's what we're doing for lessons and what's wrong with you, get busy. No, we come alongside them and say, hey, so how you feeling today? What's going on? And we don't expect them to tell us all the stuff that's going on, because that's personal. If they want to, that's fine. But it's like, I just go like, how are you feeling today? And they all know that they can have a day off. And if it's a constant where they need more than one day off, then I'm going to hook them up with the counselor. But they all know in my class they can have one day off each session. And I have I don't know if I can say this on Zoom, but pissed off pass. I have a pissed off pass hanging in the back of the classroom, so that if kids are really just like, oh, I can't handle it, they can get up, grab that pass and go out, right? And they don't have to stop and explain themselves or ask for a pass. But they also know part of that is that they have to come back at some point and chat with me, and we have to work it out, right? What's going on. So, but that they don't have to, you reduce the chances of them losing it in class, which is what we're trying to do. So we're very aware of those things. Now, that's trauma. We all face trauma. With the pandemic, there was trauma involved in the pandemic from the isolation that we had for so long. I had friends who lived alone in an apartment, and they're a teacher, and then they're on Zoom, and oh my gosh, just to hear the stories. I felt really fortunate because I just moved to Anderson Island right before the pandemic. So I had 2 acres of nobody, and I could go out and play in my yard. And so I didn't really, that first year I did pretty well. It was the second year when we were back in the classroom all wearing masks and on Zoom, and that it was much more traumatizing for me. But trauma is not a bad thing. We got to get away from judging things like, oh, that's a good or bad. No, it just happens. Trauma happens. And it's what you do with it. And that's why we talk about emotional resilience. And what's wonderful about our kids is what's wonderful that they get to develop emotional resilience at such a young age. And there's so many of us that have, like, I had a really beautiful childhood. There wasn't much trauma going on, right? And so I didn't even, by the time, what was it, when I got divorced in my 40s at some point, oh my God, that was like the first real trauma that I had. And it was just like, it just wreaked havoc in my life. And I didn't have a bunch of skills to even know what to do with that stuff. So I'm grateful that my students are learning those skills. I'm not grateful that they're having to have those experiences so young. So emotional resilience, though, is overcoming emotional trauma so that it no longer paralyzes you or restricts your ability to act and interact with others. So it doesn't mean putting it in the closet or ignoring it. No, it's just being able to overcome it in a way so you're no longer paralyzed by it. And one of the ways to overcome emotional trauma is actually through storytelling. Stories do a couple wonderful things when we share them. And some of this stuff I'm pulling from a book called Onward by Elena Aguilar. Fantastic book. But storytelling, telling stories validates your experience. When you can own a story, it's like, yes, this is my experience. You are claiming it, you are owning it. I even think of it as the story of slavery, right? We tell that story, or students tell that story, or people from that have historically maybe been enslaved tell that story because they're claiming an experience that they had. And they're owning it, and it validates it, right? We don't want to minimize something. The second thing it helps us work through the experience to heal and move forward, because if we don't even claim it, we can't really work with it. So once we've claimed it, then we can start to work with it and move through it. Doesn't make it disappear, but it helps us move through it. And then the third thing storytelling does is it helps us connect with others, right? When you tell a story, you're talking to people, right? And that's community building. So it brings you together with others. So when someone's telling you a story, though, the best thing you to do is you listen to the story and you ask clarifying questions. You accept it. You don't go, oh, no, that was not your experience. Oh, that's not right. You shouldn't think of it that way. No, that's where we have to become listeners and listen to those stories and not tell them to change their story, right? But how you tell your story, like I said at the beginning, is going to be important, right? Very, very important. So there are life depleting stories. Woe is me, and we can be woeing, right? We can be woeful or whatever, right? But when the story becomes over and over repeated, woe is me, I was a victim, I can't do anything about it, it's never gonna get better. And so when we sit in that, that's a life depleting story. Again, I'm not saying don't say what happened, it's the way you tell the story, right? And you stay in that victim mode. This kind of storytelling can create depression, feelings of shame, feelings of defeat, right? Purposelessness. You become the broken record, right? And there's no learning, there's no movement, there's no releasing of the story toxins, right? You get stuck in your painful story and you are unable to heal. I don't want to focus much on that. I just want to, we've all been there at some point, right? And so again, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing. It's part of life. But when we can realize and say, hey, wait a sec, I'm telling the same story so that I can't move forward, that becomes a life depleting story. So how can I change my story? How do I make it an empowering story so that I can work through the harm, I can release the pain and move forward? And so empowering stories, you'll know they're there because you're fostering optimism. I didn't say that right, but you know what I meant. You're restoring resilience and strength. And this is where you tell your story from this aspect. And your story becomes a message of growth. It's a lesson learned. Maybe you include that now. This is what I learned from this. This is a change in attitude, or a change in perspective, or a call to action. And in my song, Shift Happens, which I'm gonna play here next, is shift, said it right, shift happens. We are reminded that what we focus on impacts how we experience the world. So let me just change my screen here for a second. Yes, shift happens. "40 days in the wilderness, trekking on my own. Time to think and to reflect on what has come and gone. And if I dare to hear the joy of a songbird, not my whiny voice, shift happens. Zoom, zoom-buddy boom. Shift happens. Zoom, zoom-buddy boom. There are times you bicker with your friends, a boss or a spouse. When it's too much, giving in feels like the only out. And I don't know what you've been told, but by simply giving up control, shift happens. Zoom, zoom-buddy boom. Shift happens. Zoom, zoom-buddy boom. Shift, shift, shift to a table with a view. Shift, shift, shift into someone else's shoes. Shift, shift, shift to the kitchen from the lounge. Shift, shift, shift from a gavel to a plow. Shift, shift, shift from a gavel to a plow. Shift to the left or to the right, get a different point of view. Shift on down or into overdrive, been same old toodaloo. And I don't care which way you turn, 'cause either way you're gonna learn. Shift happens, well, zoom, zoom, bunny, boom. Shift happens, zoom, zoom, bunny, boom. Yes, shift, shift, shift to a table with a view. Shift, shift, shift into someone else's shoes. Shift, shift, shift to the kitchen from the lounge. Shift, shift, shift from a gavel to a plow. Shift, shift, shift from a gavel to a plow. Shift happens. There we go. I love these things, but I hate these things too at the same time. So yeah, how we look at something can make all the difference in the world. We can have the same, we can have a hard experience, but how we look at it, right, can make all the difference. So how do we create empowering stories? And the first thing I think is I love this because Elena Aguilera talks about this in her book Onward, that there are life-depleting stories are made from recognizing, or to get over life-depleting stories is to recognize old patterns of distorted thinking. Now, none of us have distorted thinking, I'm sure, right? We all just are sharp on the mind. Yeah, I see someone going over there going, and then there's other people going, yeah, right, you know, no, the person next to you. So I want to just pick 3 of the ones she looks at. And one of them is jumping to conclusions, right? We hear something and we jump to, oh my gosh, I can't believe that's going to happen, right? And so we don't even have the full story, but we just jump. And I think that happened with Trey. They didn't see a whole picture, right? It was like just jumping to conclusions. Oh my gosh, he's just trying to, do things he shouldn't be doing, right? But I think one of the best ways to get away from that is to ask questions. When someone's talking and you find yourself going, that's the best time to say, take a breath, ask questions. Find out more about what they're talking about. And when you find out more, you start to actually see it more from their perspective instead of yours, right? Because then you're not being defensive. You're saying, hey, tell me more about that. Why are you going to do that? Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that before. And you're going to find out that you actually probably relax a lot just by asking more stories instead of jumping to conclusions. Now, I know none of us do this, the catastrophizing. No. Seeing the worst case scenario no matter what. Well, what if? This will never work. This is horrible. We've tried that before. It never works, right? Well, when you do this, we know it makes things much worse than there ever are, right? And it's funny when you watch, if you're outside and you're watching it happen, you're like, that's a big deal. Now, and for me, there was a moment when I was in my 50s, I was actually homeless. So I had to move out of my apartment and I crashed with my son into a friend's house. And according to Washington State, that's homeless. I did have a place to sleep, but it wasn't my own place. We were crashing and stuff like that. And I was on food stamps and, I looked at all that stuff. And then with the cancer I had and the lupus and the divorce and then having to go in bankruptcy, I put all those things together that look at what I've thrived through, right? Here I am today to stand that, and yet, and I'll be someplace at school and something will happen, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God! And I'm like, yeah, they haven't been out much, have they? Because you're gonna make this a big deal that, it's like, this is so much work. And I'm like, yeah, but you're paid to work. I mean, you don't have to stay after. They're just giving you something to do, but it's so much work. Yeah, good, okay. Thank goodness you have a job, right? So I don't want to make fun of that, but it is kind of funny when you realize sometimes people make such a big deal out of something that never has to be, right? But when you do that, it raises your emotional level so high that you cannot be rational. You cannot problem solve because the emotions are too high. So again, you're in this, you flipped your lid and you're like, oh, like I don't know, what is that? Like you think of like the little quails that run across the street. Oh my God, oh my God. When they run, you just think that they're, flip their lid. That's the image I have. And life, it looks like such a mess, but it really isn't. It's like one situation that isn't like how you want it to be. And you've turned it into like chaos. So again, what do you do with that? one thing we can all do is just breathe and release, right? Do something to relax. You know, you don't, your first action doesn't have to be catastrophe. First could be breathing and relaxing, taking it in, and then determining what to do with it. Recognize it is not as bad as you think it is, and tell yourself the situation is manageable. That's that self-talk, right? Using self-talk to slow yourself down, to calm yourself down. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, doesn't mean you have to like the situation. I mean, that is not what I'm saying. But it's how you're going to handle it, right? The third one, I picked these because I can relate to them too. Feelings are facts. I feel horrible about this, so it must be horrible. And we turn our feelings like, oh, I'm afraid of this, so this must be something we should be afraid of, right? So because of the feelings that we have, we connect them. It's like, oh, this is the way it is. The feelings are the facts. But in reality, feelings are simply our signals telling us something about ourselves. I taught anger management in Hawaii for a couple years to juveniles coming from family court. And we would talk about anger. Anger is just a signal. It's telling you that you don't like something. You don't want something a certain way. So same with in all of your feelings. If you're afraid, it's telling you that you are afraid of something. It's not telling you that that is something you should be afraid of. Do you see the difference? I'm afraid of this, but it doesn't mean that is something I need to be afraid of. If I am feeling, I want to make sure I don't miss my examples. If I'm feeling uncomfortable, it's telling me that I don't feel good in this situation, but it's not telling me that the people out there hate me. I mean, I could do that after I'm like, I'm feeling so uncomfortable, they don't like me. But that doesn't mean that the people don't like what you're doing, right? So there's different ways of changing your feelings around to realizing they're just feelings. And so own it. You know, oh, this is telling me something about me. What's this telling me? Oh, there's my insecurities again. Or, you know, there's my irrational, you know, fears again, right? You know, and it's like, oh, silly me, I get it, right? And then just say, but that doesn't make this situation do this. And again, if we get caught into that, again, we can become paralyzed and not move forward. So besides recognizing old patterns of distorted thinking, the second, I'm going to do three things. And the second one is set some intentions. Determine what you want the end result to be. Have that in mind. What's the end result? What do you want to get from your story? Do you want to get relief, validation, personal power? What is it that you want to get? You can also ask the question is, what do you want others to get from your story? Because remember, when you're storytelling, you are sharing with somebody else. What do you want them to get from it? Do you want them to feel doom and gloom and jump on board with you for the doom and gloom? Or do you want them to say, oh, my gosh, I'm inspired. I'm going to go out and do this. You're calling them to action. So during one of the darkest times of my life, this is after my divorce, I wrote a song called Wings on Wind that shared and embraced the pain that I was going through, but it also included a call to something better, to a better place that I wanted to reach. And so I sang the song a lot. I just sit in my living room and play the song. It was just for me. You know, I wrote the song for me. I'm playing it and I'm singing it because it helped me validate the feelings and the emotions, but it also helped me separate, saying, this is not where I'm stuck. This is where I am, but this is what I'm going to move towards. I'm going to believe this, that the whole thing is that using some scriptures that God, you know, values us like better than the flowers of the field, right? There's that reference there. And so several references where you're realizing that, okay, that my value and where I'm going to be is this out here and not staying right here. But I'm going through this right now because it's a difficult time. And I have to say that it worked. It did a lot for me. And because I could sit down and play that song, and when I was through with the song, if I hadn't shifted, I would play it again. And then usually there was a shift in my thinking, and I was able to get up and move forward step after step to do what I needed to do, you know, for my life, right? But when I got through that period, now I recorded, it's on one of my CDs, And it's a beautiful song. I absolutely love it. I did it once at a prison. And I said, now when I sing it for others, because I want, if there's somebody out there that's feeling that can own that and can just say, okay, that validates their experience, but I'm also giving them something that they also can say, hey, I'm more than this. I can be more than this. I am more than this, and I can move through this, right? So just being able to set your intentions of what you want. And that's a lot of my songwriting. If you listen to my songs, there's always, sometimes people go, oh, your songs are so depressing. I'm like, because you didn't my parents put on my latest CD, and they put on a song, and I'm going to do Call It Good. And they're like, oh, we couldn't listen to the rest of the CD. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't get past the verse, right? When you get to the chorus, it's all about how you shift, right? It wasn't shift tap, it was another one. But it's just, it's like, yes, but some people have a hard time sitting with the pain, and I get that. But there's so many, they're like, oh, you're validating my pain, but I don't have to stay here. And so that's kind of what that's about. So the third thing, okay, we talked about identifying the old patterns of distorted thinking, and then intentions of what you want to happen. So the third thing is spin your story. Add a positive twist. You choose what you want to tell. You can change the focus, right, of something being positive. Add what you're learning from it. So this is what I did, but this is what I learned. This is what happened, but this is how I grew. This is how I overcame this challenge, right? This is why this was helpful for me, right? And so again, I like to get away from that theology about just, everything's good. Well, everything is in a sense, but I want to say, oh, that I so thank good for that. That was just the positive. No, it was a sucky thing. But I'm grateful that I had the wherewithal to deal with it, to handle it, that I had a community that surrounded me, so I can move forward, right? So it's not we have to go around, praising God for everything. It's like, well, yeah, but maybe you're praising it for the fact that you're learning something from it, or praising it that God is with you in it, right? There's ways to look at that instead of just saying, oh, I'm glad this crap is happening. No, we're not there. We're not there. I talk like that because I work with high school students, so sorry, you're not offended. And the other part of spinning the old story, okay, one is changing the focus, but the other part is just let the old stories go. Do you have to hang on to them? I have a friend who still has the same old story, and I let him continue to tell it because that's where he is, right? I'm not going to say anything to him that way, but he just hangs on to it because somehow he needs it still, But you have to ask yourself, is it serving you well, like in Release and Breathe, right? Is it serving you well? Do you need that to hang on to that story? So just in closing, I'm going to say that we can overcome emotional trauma by telling empowering stories that aid us in our healing, right? They help us to adjust. They help us accept, love ourselves, and they help us move on when we're ready. So with that, I'm going to close with a song called Call It Good. I just said, don't call it good, right? It's called Call It Good. If you feel sad at the beginning, just remember it gets better, right? So don't panic. I didn't think my vows would be for nothing, but after 15 years, that's how it felt. He packed his bags, hit the road, and he left me standing in a house too big, in shoes that didn't fit, and with a heart overwhelmed. A tragic story, like Shakespeare might cast, but it doesn't say who I am or what I'm worth. I'm not my past. Shrug off the jury and forgive myself, 'cause I know I did the best I could. I put the blame back on the shelf and called it good. There are those who spend a lifetime remembering everything that ever went wrong. When I was 5, and then again at 12 and 17, I was ignored, but who's keeping score? And so the song goes on and on, a tragic story, like Shakespeare might cast, but it doesn't say who you are or what you're worth. You're not your past. Shrug off the jury and forgive yourself. Know you did the best you could. Now put that blame back on the shelf and call it good. 'Cause like a river, we can move ahead if we jump from our shipwrecks. Broken bones and battered hearts never have to dictate what comes next. A tragic story, like Shakespeare might cast. It doesn't say who you are or what you're worth. You're not your past. Shrug off the jury and forgive yourself. Know you did the best you could. Now put that blame back on the shelf and call it good. Call it good. Call it good. Thank you. Thank you.